Are you a hardworking dad, juggling family responsibilities while dreaming of building wealth through real estate? Welcome to the Invested Fathers Podcast, where we explore how to balance investing and fatherhood. I'm your host, Kenny Johnson, founder of East West Capital. Over the past 5 years, I've been buying real estate to free up my time and secure my family's future. Now I'm here to help you do the same. Join me as we navigate the real estate world together, building wealth and strengthening our families. As my grandma always said, East West, home's best. Our next interview is with Owen Reimer, successful real estate investor in Canada and dad to a 14-year-old son. Similar to any business owner or entrepreneur, Owen has faced some big challenges over the years. But maybe one of the biggest challenges he shares in this episode has been in his home life of facing multiple failed pregnancies with his wife and being a leader at home raising a 14-year-old son. While you listen to Owen's responses and mindset to a few of these difficult seasons of his life, I hope you all will be inspired by how his faith and source of identity continue to guide him in his evolving business ventures and leadership at home. And now for episode 5. Hey, Owen, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Owen, I'm going to turn it over to you. Tell the audience who you are and high-level bio, and we'll dive deep into those things.
Yeah, probably how I got to where I'm at. I had a financial services business for a bunch of years. Did some private equity and private real estate as that part of that service, also some insurance. Sold that in 2019. Spent about a year trying to figure out what the next steps was, and just found that was real estate. We'd had some experiences with a business that the business ended up failing, but the real estate that we'd gotten involved with ended up saving our skins, is the nicest way to say it. So yeah, we lost some money on the business side, but the gains on the real estate side kind of saved us.
Wow. Okay.
From there, we decided that, real estate seemed to be the best fit from where I was going to go to. I spent a short-term time in a company trying to figure out, what should I do? And just we came back to doing real estate. Like I said, I'd raised capital for other guys in the past, doing buildings and things like that. And we just looked at development seemed to be the best fit for creating a business model out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So we created did a couple syndications where we built some brand new multifamily apartments, did another joint venture, I think around 68 doors of apartments under management, another 72 under development. And we also have a mobile home trailer park where we are subdividing and turning it into multifamily lots. And we have other multifamily land. So we started really in 2021.
Wow.
We have a model of crawl, walk, run. So the first couple you're trying to figure out, does this work? Does it work to build and do syndication wise? How's the, all the different pieces involved? Can we build? Does it make sense? Did the model work? And now it does. So now we kind of keep the next phase. And so we start with the 16, then we build a 20. Now we're starting with 236 unit apartments, one after the other. And then we're working on closing some land that we can do 140 doors on. So
wow.
Yeah.
Owen, what a resume.
Crawl, walk, run, grow from there.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go back a little bit. You weren't always doing this. Obviously, you were kind of around private equity, somewhat real estate, started doing this. And before we jumped on the call, you had talked about sort of that entrepreneurship mindset. Can you walk us through, how did you evolve into this? I mean, the numbers you just spit out there were big, very big to me.
Yeah.
How did you get there?
Self-employed. I've always been kind of self-employed. I grew up on a dairy farm, like I said. So I've seen that, you lived it. It was a family-run organization. So it's my dad, my mom, and then when I was old enough to come help in the barn, then we had a small farm. And realistically, that it was time for my dad either to get out or scale bigger. He's a great manager, but I don't know if he's a visionary necessarily. So when I wasn't keen on dairying, you got to be married to it is the nicest way to say it. There's other farming models that maybe aren't quite so intensified, but farming is definitely a love. You got to love it. So I didn't love it. So it was time to go. What I didn't understand at the time, and I think maybe what he was trying to teach me was the value isn't necessarily in the farming. It's in the asset, right? It's in the land, and in Canada, we use the quota system for milk production. It's all about the asset that you're owning. The operations is to pay for the asset. That's the learning piece and the entrepreneurial side. So I got that bit of like a bug where, you could do your own, create your own future is the nicest way to say it.
Mm.
I worked here and there for people, I guess, over the years.
Yeah.
Realized, at the end of the day, I would always did best when I knew I could control my time. Even on jobs where I could get paid based on production, not based on punching a clock.
Hmm.
So that kind of
Awesome.
got me going from there. And I never really, even if I worked somewhere for somebody else for a short period of time, I end up going back to doing something for myself because I value that freedom.
Yeah, I tell people, at least from my journey, and I come from a sales and customer service background, did the same job for a small startup landscaping company for almost 10 years. I did feel stuck and I couldn't figure out how to unlock where am I the happiest, and I'm really good at doing this. That's what I've termed as the Thrive Zone from a book from Michael Hyatt. And once someone actually like dives deep and sort of asks themselves that questions and answers that question and then acts on it, I feel like the magic starts happening. Right?
Yeah.
And another thing that I feel like is really, I think, very integral is partnerships. You talked about your dad's, not necessarily being a visionary, but probably an amazing operator, integrator type of person. You may have leaned more toward visionary type of ideas, but still needed help along the way. Could you maybe speak into like the idea of who, not how of
Yeah, for
your
sure.
journey?
At exactly that. I mean, on the general partners, like we create our project based off a GPLP side of things. The general partner side, I've had, consistently there's one guy that's been involved, and I wouldn't call him necessarily the integrator piece of it. He'd probably be a bit more of a, making sure I'm bringing on the integrator piece of it, and I'm taking care of getting those pieces in. I mean, right
Got it.
now we've always been on our build side of things. I've always kind of brought in people, whether it be my banker, lawyer,
Hmm.
accountant,
Hmm.
those kind of people to help me kind of steer certain things right. I also bring in a project manager, a construction manager that
Wow.
that knows what they're doing
Hmm.
because I don't always, right? I kind of have a good
Right.
idea, but I depend on them for the day to day on a job site to make sure that everything gets done on time and everything's built correctly. And then on top of that, we bring in a property manager for managing the tenants and bringing in tenants and working with them on a day to day basis. So I value all those partnerships. And some of them are in house, and some of them are, we'll call it beneficial partnerships, where we
Hmm.
trade time for money or whatever the case may be. A lot of people want to do everything themselves.
Hmm.
And when you start doing that, I mean, there's a certain point where you have to do a lot of things yourself.
Hmm.
But what you find is now you're burning into all your personal time
Hmm.
just to finish. You got lots of there's always something else to do.
Right.
And the hard thing about being an entrepreneur sometimes is like you like your work. Well, you
Hmm.
should, otherwise, why would you?
Right.
And sometimes you're like, I could just work all the time. And you also like, he said, as a father, I'm a father, and I gotta say, well, I gotta turn that off and take
Hmm.
time for my family and build into that as well. Not always the easiest thing.
Hmm.
I wouldn't say I'm a natural father in that regards. Some people just do it better, and
Hmm.
that's okay. And I'm still learning, even though my son is 14 years old. We're still, it was
Oh
easy
yeah.
when he was younger. I'll tell you that much. There's parts now that it's like, wow, had I known what I know now, but you go from there.
Yeah. I have a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old. The girl is 3, the boy is 7. We've been married for 10 years. And what is it, just a boy, 14-year-old boy, or is there
Yeah.
more?
Well, I mean, there's a longer story behind it. I mean, we've been married for 20 years this summer. Uh,
Congratulations, brother.
yeah, we have a 14, he'll be 15 in fall.
Okay.
We do have a story there where we had, I guess, 3 other pregnancies that were, I guess, stillbirth or something like that. We have a genetic
Hmm.
condition. So
Hmm.
we found that out, unfortunately. We have a rare genetic condition where only 1 out of 25% of pregnancies technically would be affected. In our case, it ended up being 3 out of 4. So
Oh my
we
goodness, I'm
decided
so sorry.
to move on from that.
Yes.
In fact,
Yes.
like you said, it wasn't our plan. Our plan was to have lots of kids.
Right.
We come from larger families, like
Hmm.
from 5 kids. My wife comes from 4 kids.
Yep.
3 to 5 is a nice range.
Right.
Um, and so we have one.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's a different dynamic than I was expecting, but
Yes.
there's a saying we use. My son will say it if you don't like a present, is you get what you get and don't get upset.
That's a
So
good one.
yeah, yeah,
You get what you get, don't get upset.
You get what you get and don't get
And
upset.
don't go that. Okay. Okay. We had an idea of parenthood as well. Our son has a dairy allergy, which, everyone, I mean, the genetics, there's all sorts of things that parents face. And it's fascinating for me to hear the stories of like, this was our expectation. It didn't happen. And this is how we adjusted. And this is where we are today. And these are the struggles that we face. And I feel like that all plays the part of who you are today, is like experiencing those things with your wife. 20 years. It's a long time to be married. We've been married for 10 and a half years now, my wife and I. And there was so much we didn't know when we first got married about each other.
And
And
it keeps going, right? Like,
it does.
there's dynamics that are always in there, family. And I mean, for us, we're both firstborns as well.
Okay.
And, I'm a typical firstborn. And so we have definitely have challenges. I heard an interesting podcast the other day. It was a guy named Manny Arango. He was on Ryan Panada's
Yeah.
podcast. Manny's a great speaker, preacher. And some advice that he had gotten when he first got married from his pastor was to not use his gifts. Like, so he's a great speaker.
Mm-hmm.
So he says, don't use that when you argue with your wife.
Okay.
Don't bring that into that, right? Because that can really damage your relationship, because you have a gift there of speaking and you can be really fast with your words. And you win arguments just for the sake of winning them, because that's your gifting. But that's not right. Like, oh, there's something there for me, like 28 years after being, what did I learn from that? And there's some things too where I'm like, how do we solve conflict? And is it a win to win? Or are you what is the actual outcome? What are you trying to,
right?
Are you trying to win for yourself, or are you trying to win for your relationship?
Right. I'm constantly seeing the importance of being on the same team, being on the same side, being a unified front. And I'm a believer, follow Jesus Christ. And that idea of just like, I'm half a person and this is my other half, especially as parents, because I feel like the kids see that so quickly when mom and dad are, maybe not quite together here. They will just, oh, well, dad said this and that's what I'm going to do because mom didn't say it. I'm still on the front end of 3 and 7 years old versus 14 and beyond, where they get smarter.
Well, they think they get smart.
Their mind thinks they're very smart, and they pick up on things.
Yeah, the time you spend when they're younger building those relationships is key, right? And I mean, I look at it and say there's parts where I've, we'll call it regrets, is a nice way to say it, and say I wish I would have done more to build that, so that now I could have more authority, right? So it's like sometimes I look and I'm like, I don't want I grew up on a farm, right? And so I had experiences that my son doesn't have. Responsibility and work ethic, and I want my son to have some of that. And
right.
So you're just being too hard on him. You're pushing him away, and I gotta be careful with that. So he's not me,
right?
And I'm like, I can't.
So wise.
And I don't want to be my father to my son,
right? Because he's not you.
There's aspects I didn't like of my childhood.
Yeah.
I didn't like it when my dad did this. Now, if I do the same thing. When they talk about, when the Bible talks about generational sin, and I think sometimes, everybody thinks it's like alcoholism or these addictions or things like that. I think it's stuff like that, even like just bad. How do you treat your family, right? Is that a generational issue, right? So, I mean, you look at, what can you change so that the future generation doesn't carry forward that to their families? And you look at this also generational blessing, where I see it in my wife's family, where you have generations of believers and have built into one another. And it's intentional. Like it doesn't come by accident. Like you have to be intentional on this stuff. And you see the fruit of that over many years of a family that her parents and aunts and uncles are all in their 60s. And I'm we'll call it the oldest grandchild, even though I'm married in. My wife's the oldest grandchild. And you see that now generationally with us and now the great grandchildren, and just how the closeness that we get. And it's not because we all like each other all the time. It's because we have a higher calling. So,
yeah.
We have that in common.
Man.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. It's not common. And I mean, there's nobody's perfect, but I would say it's not a dysfunctional family, which is
that's great.
Fantastic. So. Yeah.
And I think everyone probably feels like they're in a dysfunctional family, no matter, how pretty they look at church or, whatever. So to hear a story of, hey, this took intentionality this is a generational blessing because we've hopefully have Jesus in our hearts and are willing to forgive and love and all those things that are unnatural and from the spirit. I love hearing
Yeah.
that. Thank you for that
Yeah.
share.
Bitterness is like, it doesn't work good for anybody, right? Like,
No,
it doesn't matter whether you're a Christ follower or not. I mean, bitterness
true.
wrecks lots of relationships. Bitterness also wrecks a lot of business relationships too. Like, I mean, like I said, we had one that didn't work out great.
Yeah.
And, we could be bitter about things if we wanted to. But what does that solve?
Yeah.
Like, I heard a saying, being bitter is like swallowing poisoning and hoping the other person dies.
Oh my goodness.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
and that hit me, right? That hit me. I heard that a few years ago. And there's always things where you could be like, oh, I don't like this. I'm gonna be bitter. And you don't say I'm gonna be bitter about it, but
Right.
you have those feelings and you create those walls. All it does is it harms yourself.
Exactly. You're the one in bondage when that
Yeah.
happens. You're
Yeah.
actually a slave to that person.
Create your own barriers. Like, create your barriers, create
Mm.
your boundaries, a better way to say it, so that you don't get re-hurt or whatever
Hmm.
in personal life and business life or whatever. And I think teaching our kids that kind of stuff is important because, especially in today's world, technology and cell phones and all that kind of stuff, like, it's not like when I grew up.
No.
I grew up, there was no cell phones in school at all.
Right. Right.
And I go, it would be so nice if there wasn't. I get why there is now. It's just going to be what it is. The kids are just mean to each other.
They are. They really are. Yeah.
They don't understand what they're saying and the long-term effects often of these things. Like in the high schools, there's kids that are, messaging groups and telling kids that they should just kill themselves.
Yeah.
You hear about this. I hear this from people involved in the school system. So,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh, the kids just don't know, but that is just damages people.
Yeah.
Not worth it. So,
Well, and you're 14 or, whatever age you are hearing that. And where do you turn? And I would hope the home is the place where you can confide, that there's your security. And if there's not a relationship, maybe at home, you're in trouble. Like you talked about sort of those regrets, and it's like there's formative years and there's, just time with your kids.
yeah.
You mentioned COVID and probably the whirlwind of your business life in that, sense of losing businesses and shutting down businesses and selling things and making money and then breaking even and all these things. So it seemed like there was highs and lows, and it doesn't seem like that now. It seems like there's like a steady Eddie curve. I mean, maybe there's still
stresses. There's always stress.
Okay.
There's always stressing going on.
And for entrepreneurs, like in a way, we maybe thrive on some of that. Like, hey, this is a challenge. Like, I'm going to solve this thing, and when I do, it's going to be fulfilling. And then I'm going to maybe try to find another challenge. But speaking to sort of your mindset on just like, how do you deal with the highs and lows? And then as a parent, how are you present at home amidst the chaos that you're feeling in the workplace?
Well, yeah, like I definitely got to be careful. Like, when I've had some really stressful moments, I think it does affect my family life. I gotta I gotta work harder not to bring those stressors into my family life, so it affects them in a negative way.
Mhm.
And like, I'm not perfect.
So hard. No, so hard, man.
I definitely make lots of mistakes,
Mm.
but I think the big thing is how do you get through these things that are negative wise, and how do you manage them? Often I'd say important to have good mentors involved around you, whether that be, people your own age, or older, whatever the case may be, people have gone through things. I mean, when we had that big loss, you kept dwelling on it.
Mm-hmm.
A mentor of mine took me out for lunch and we chatted about it. He told me how much money he lost on a failed business venture. And then he said, okay, how much have you lost? We talked about numbers, and they're big. And then he said, okay, that's done, move on.
There it is. What was the saying your son said again? You get what you get.
Yeah. And further on that one, I got a last minute kind of invite and went along with a few older guys to Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting with Warren Buffett there. I mean, you could definitely see he was missing his sidekick, Charlie Munger, who he had with him for many, many, many. You talk about a great business partnership that those guys had, like fantastic. But somebody asked him a question about a business that they took over, and there was some funny accounting that went on. I'm not totally sure the story, but his commentary on that was, all's well that ends. He stopped. You know that there's a saying, all's well that ends well?
Yeah.
Right? All's well
that
that ends.
ends.
I was like, that's a fantastic sometimes this is the way it is. You just hit ends, move on, right?
Yeah. I was
Like
on the notes.
if you, yeah, if you, and I think you hit on it. I mean, kids these days and us in general, we live in a world of identity crisis.
Right.
We're all focused on what's our identity, and sometimes
Right.
it's very mixed up. And so I think finding, finding our identity in Christ, number
Mm-hmm.
one, it
Mm-hmm.
lets you be free from all those other, we call them identities that the world wants to label you on, and it lets you be a little live in freedom.
Absolutely.
Uh, like I said, not always perfect in my world, but definitely that's the thing I'm striving towards, and also embracing my strengths, right? There's talk out there over the years, find out what your weaknesses are and improve on those. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
no,
Mm-hmm.
those aren't my strengths. And
Mm-hmm.
they're not really weaknesses, they're just not my strengths. So bring in somebody who's good at those things
Mm-hmm.
and really double down on my strengths, because that's where not only am I meant to be, I create the most value for everybody, whether it be my family,
Right.
my business partners, my investor partners,
Yep.
all the people involved. We do way better. And even in the organizations that I volunteer with or things like that, if I
Right.
know my strengths, I use my strengths,
Yes.
then we're good.
I love
Um,
that.
it's interesting, that being said, with strengths, though, often strengths can be your greatest problems too. So like one of my strengths is in command. I can be a good commander, and I switch say it.
Yeah.
Strength. Now, when that's in a positive, fantastic. If
Yes.
it's a negative, I'm a dictator.
Got it.
And
Yep.
your family sees that the most, right?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So,
Absolutely.
so I got to work on that,
That's great, man.
but it's awareness now. I'm aware.
That's where I was going to go with that is, they have those personality tests, they have those organizational,
Yeah.
what's your number, what's your letter, and
Yeah.
I
I
think
got
those are
some.
powerful. I think
Yeah.
those are really good. I've always resisted those kind of in previous Kenny life because I thought I don't want to be put in a box. I can be whatever I want to be, and maybe some days I'm this and maybe some days I'm this. But the older I get, the more I realize just figure out like where are you normally and then embrace it and then recognize like, hey, this could be a weakness in certain areas, like you said, like commander mode is maybe not what's effective with your son or your wife at a certain time. But it may be in this startup community thing or a church event or your business, like we need a commander and I'm going to do that. And I'll hire, customer relations person over here to help with some of those other things. So that's
Exactly.
awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, in business wise, highs and lows. I mean, I've had some highs where you finish a project, you do a
Yeah.
refinance, and send money back to everybody, and they're just
Yeah.
pumped. Right?
Yeah.
I'm pumped too. I'm like, okay, great, next. I
Yes.
don't dwell a long time on the highs because you can't eat those,
Okay.
right? They're there. That's what your goal was. So what's the big deal? Now you hit your target, move
Go.
on. What's next? And lows too. I think sometimes you can dwell too much on lows. Find out what your lessons are on
Mm.
those
Hmm.
and implement them going forward. Saying, okay, what not to do, but don't dwell on say, okay, I failed one time here, or this failed. Now I'm a failure. It's just like same thing. You have a success one time. It's not like, oh, I'm 100% successful all the time.
Exactly.
So why would you say it the other way? But I think we often get trapped in that. We get a little bit of fear moving forward, and
Hmm.
I'm guilty of that along the way.
Hmm.
But the more we can just say, okay, I'm not a failure based on what's happened in the past. But here's the thing: if you don't learn from it, then you're prone to
You're
repeat it,
you're
and
in
then you're
trouble.
gonna have a string of those, and that's not good either. So,
Exactly.
so try to find the ways to have more wins than losses.
Momentum. Yeah.
And it's a lot more fun to win, I'll tell you that.
It is. No, I've recently I had a win. I do single family homes.
Great, yeah.
I'm getting into more multifamily, but I've had this house that's been empty for about, I don't know, 2 months. I used a property management group to place the tenant. And I've just been thinking, man, I did it too high or, all these kind of like, yeah, let's just kind of let it be, but also double guessing. And we've had an applicant fill out the application to rent it. And I've been really excited about it. But there's a high there. And then a few other highs happen just in my business and even in life and just with my marriage and my kids. So I think those are times we have to enjoy, of course, ride that wave, but don't, it's like, okay, I can just relax now for a few weeks because I had these wins. Now, the lows are coming if you're not careful, but that consistency in what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I think you're speaking gold right now, man. And just hopefully for our listeners, and I know at least for myself, we have to just be preaching these truths to us over and over And you've said it before, like, hey, I'm not perfect. You're not perfect, but we know the truth in regards to like you keep going. And also for those that are Christians and the truth that, hey, your identity is in Christ. It's not based on performance. You don't have to have this like, if I don't perform, I'm a failure. That's done. God loves exactly who we are today. And that is the best thing in the world. And now it's just go out and serve others and be joyful, be productive,
Yeah.
help
I think we're
people, help
supposed to
solve
be.
things.
I think sometimes we feel like, hey, if I'm not singing up front with the church, I'm
No.
not,
Yeah.
I'm not a servant, right?
Right. No.
I think the business community, maybe more so where I am, for many years, they just kind of like, well, if I'm just a business guy, kind of you're locked out in a sense. What's my purpose in the church community? I think it's starting to change now. I'm talking predominantly just the men groups where your business minded guys get together and grow one
Mm.
another. Super important. You see that, like, yeah, in the Raise Masters and stuff like that. And there's other groups like that out there where you actually kind of find your group, right?
Yeah.
And what's working, what's not working. You push each other through. And I was actually just on Hunter Thompson does Raise Master Radio.
Okay.
So he had me on, because I guess I'd mentioned some wins in the column thing. And I didn't, I was shy on doing that. I'm a, Canadian, we're a little bit more polite and humble. That kind of humility is our big thing.
Yeah.
And I guess Josh had said, you need to put it out there and say some of your wins. And so then I'm on the Raise Master Radio and I go, what am I supposed to talk? Just talk about a win. And I'm like, well, I don't really have like one big one, but I have a bunch of them. So we talked about stacking wins. And I
Yeah.
think that's a thing that I want to look at more and more and saying, it's not one big item that's done really well. It's lots of little things along the way, right? And even as you do a deal, like we're doing a 36 unit in St. Pierre, Manitoba, we're still raising capital for it because I paused on it a little bit because I was like, maybe I should stop because we're a bit delayed on our build side of things. Now we're going forward, and I'm like, oh shoot, I shouldn't have done that. I should
Just
have
gonna
kept going, right? And so we're moving along, and there's some wins along the way with that. That's been fantastic. The weather up here, we've had a lot of rain lately, so it's really slowed us down on certain things, getting some of the infrastructure into the ground. Hopefully, I think we're supposed to start going vertical in the next week or so.
Congrats.
As long as the carpenters can show up because they've been delayed on other jobs.
I'm sure.
But yeah, we're moving forward. I really enjoy it when we start going forward. But when we're going vertical, I'm already starting to think about what's next.
Yeah.
I'm already looking at our next builds, our next projects, because kind of my heavy lift has already been done. Now, as I put it on to the project manager, now he can do the rest.
Right.
And I'm just kind of the background of that, making sure all the things line up. But realistically, I'm thinking of the vision on the next. That's the piece where I talk about where I'm more visionary.
Yes.
Mentor. I've
Yes.
been able to put all the things together.
Yes.
At the back end. But I'm going to create, what are we building? Where are we building it? Who's going to all be involved? And hopefully I don't offend too many people along the way.
Oh my. Now, I definitely am picking up on your strengths and your role as well. I feel like you've nestled into that. You said commander, but also just the idea of a connector. Like you're thinking ahead, and maybe the commander is the connector, but you're bringing the different people that are needed together to make these things operate smoothly, on time. And once you find the right person to fit whatever it is that's going on, like you said, going vertical, you're already thinking about the next thing that needs to be done. That's a gap. Let me ask you this, Owen. Capital raising obviously is the group that we've joined and have seen a need there. Speaking to my audience and even to myself on just the importance of capital raising, and for those out there that are just, they don't want to do what you're doing because what you're doing is heavy lifting, and they're actually very happy. Like you talked about sort of the roles in the church and how there's different people doing different things to serve. So they're doing their thing in a business, but they want to get into real estate. Maybe they've done some real estate before. Talk to me a little bit about like, everything's going to crash, or like, there's no more deals, or, these things that are a little bit more like, when do I get in, or what's a good deal to get into?
And yeah, interesting. So like I said, I started in financial services back in 2005. So I went through the 08, 09 crash.
Okay. So that's like, that was a time you remember. Yes.
Oh yeah. Time. I look back and say, I wish I had more money because I saw the deals. I just didn't have money at that point in time in my life. I just built a house. Basically all my money was trapped up in my new house I just built.
Yeah.
And oh my gosh, and we'd gone through some right, that was right when we started doing some personal losses I had previously mentioned. So your head is just not in the game, right? So, you look at those, I don't know, I don't see it like right now. That was like a massive like market on overbuilt housing and debt structures that we don't have today. We don't have a supply that's caught up to that. When that stopped, the population kept growing, the need kept growing, but you had a gap now of a bunch of years where nothing got done. And now we'll never catch up to that at this point in time, just because you get enough going and all of a sudden, boom, something throws it for a loop. I don't know if we're going to see the same kind of, we'll call it crash. It really doesn't matter whether markets are good or bad. That's a saying, I guess. I think the biggest thing is looking and saying, well, who are my operators? Who am I partnering with? Because that's really what it boils down to. And then what's their, we work really hard at creating that know, like, and trust thing for our investor base. I mean, a lot of them, like you said, they don't want to be doing the day to day, but they all go, we want real estate. You go, well, why do you want real estate? Well, at the end of the day, like we talked about, you can talk about it. I mean, the house that was $100,000 a bunch of years ago now is a $300,000 house. Does it look any different? No, it doesn't. Well, why is that? Well, the replacement cost is up. So we're constantly seeing, we'll call it inflation. Inflation is going to happen no matter what, unless we have deflation. I hope now that's a whole different topic. But I see inflation, especially because we play in, we call it funny money world with fiat currencies. So what that triggers long-term is inflation and money printing. So what real estate does is it keeps you current, right? So the value of property today is 200 grand in today's world. In a bunch of years, it's going to be worth whatever it is. Just keeps you current, it doesn't necessarily say that the value actually grew. It could just keeps your dollar from depreciating, keeps your currency from depreciating. So you have buying power for the future. I think that's the biggest thing that people are not seeing always. It's not about getting rich. It's about maintaining your asset value long term. And real estate does a good way of doing that, because there is a saying, buy land, they're not making any more of it.
Right. They're not making more.
Maybe in the Indian Ocean somewhere, they're pumping and making physics and that stuff. But overall, the other piece of it is, I mean, not overpaying at any point in time.
Right. Right.
If there's lots of guys where they maybe got a little aggressive when they had to get a deal.
Right.
So, I mean, we look at every build that we do and think, well, how can we make sure that we're not going to lose right off the hop?
Right.
We're very conscientious of our debt structures.
Yep.
Making sure that, hey, as soon as this thing is done, it cash flows day one. And we have reserves, like money reserves. These are all like things you keep hearing about, but people get like off on it. And it's very easy, right? I mean, a lot of guys that have been really good have, had some deals go sideways. I think the other key item is making sure your deals aren't all connected to one another. So what I mean by that is, actually, there's a couple guys that hurt in the past I've talked about, and they lost all their, let's say they had some really good assets and some really bad assets. And during the last crash in 2009, they lost everything because they cross-collateralized, meaning everything was connected to each other. So maybe you could grow really fast because you just kept recycling your debt on the previous deal. But all of a sudden you have, it's like a house of cards. You pull one out, boom, the whole thing falls. So we make sure all our deals are not connected to one another, so that if something goes bad with one,
right,
it's not going to affect the other.
Domino. Yeah.
Right. We don't want anything bad to happen with any of them.
Right.
Key item, right? But you also want to protect your investors as much as you possibly can, because we're shepherding their wealth.
Absolutely.
Because they look and say, I like real estate. I don't want to be a landlord.
Right. You hear it all the time.
And I mean, and they know they want real estate. We get guys that come in, investors that be like, hey, I've had a couple single family homes, rented them out, tired of being a landlord. It's not even the toilet. It's like people say, I don't want to unplug a toilet at 2 a.m. It's like, no, that's not even it. It's, they just don't want to deal with it at all. And it's
time.
Lots of little pieces. It's a lot of time. And they're like,
energy.
Like, I like my job.
Right.
I don't have time to manage an apartment. Or you look at their cost of time and they're like, I need to park my money somewhere, but I'm a dentist or an engineer or a high paid sales guy. I don't have time to be running around dealing with all this stuff. It doesn't make me any money. My time is better spent in my profession.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So like, here's my money. Sometimes they've had to learn that the hard way, and sometimes they do it before they learn it the hard way. So,
right. Oh, this has been great, man. We're going to wrap it up. You're in Canada. I'm in South Carolina. But for anyone listening out there that wants to know more about Owen Reimer, what he's working on, I mean, he's probably going to be building some 1,000-unit, who knows, in the next couple months here. Give us how we can follow you in your journey.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn under Owen Reimer. I also have a website, stoneshorecapital.com. Those are probably the best ways to find out where I'm at. And follow us, like our stuff, connect. I like to chat, as you can all tell.
Owen, thanks so much. You've given us a lot of nuggets that I'm excited about dwelling on. Thank you all for listening today, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Invested Fathers podcast. If you liked this episode, we would love for you to click subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. We appreciate all of your hard work as a father and look forward to our next episode together.